and welcome back to End Times Prophecy News Update. This is Carrie Geren Scoggins, covering recent protests against Islam, which turned out to be mobs of radical leftists there to defend Islam.
June 10th, 2017, Act for America, led by global Islamic terrorism expert Bridget Gabriel, staged roughly 30 anti-Sharia rallies in cities across America to bring average Americans face-to-face with those that would support honor killings, female mutilation, and a creeping non-conformist Sharia law into the final holdout known as these United States of America.
Why I'm here is if they start violence, if they start attacking people, vandalizing, cops are generally told to back down throughout America. It's going to take the American people to stand up to these guys and put them into place. They have every right to do this. I respect that. I'm a patriot. But I will not sit by and watch them assault or vandalize. Go back to your group and be safe.
Which group is mine, sir?
You tell me. You got a mask on.
Which group is this?
You got a mask on.
Which group is this?
I told you. So the bottom line is, these guys have got to know that America's not going to put up with it.
Lauren Morris, a victim of female mutilation and protected by Oath Keepers after her life was threatened for speaking at the event, spoke in solidarity with the victims of Sharia law already affecting females in the United States. As expected, the Soros shill patrol known as Antifa was in full effect, offering zero topics for a rational debate. Their mind-numbing cult-like teenage shrills, a reverse of the intended effect of dividing the Americans that gathered to question Antifa's moronic subversion, actually bringing average tax-paying Americans on their day off together to focus on the tide of extremism threatening the country's future. John Bound for Infowars.com.
Most leftists in the past have spoke out against radical groups such as Islam. It's been some time now since the hate speech laws were overturned in the federal Supreme Court, upholding our legal right to debate the issue. Issues such as Islam and homosexuality were cited specifically in the federal Supreme Court. The American public has been kept ignorant of the law. Many radical leftists did not want the American public to know that the hate speech law had been overturned and that they were no longer to fear censorship of speaking out against Islam. When blame placing on the ignorance of those that are in support of Islam and the apologists for Islamic Sharia law, one must blame the now overturned hate speech laws. The fear of censorship that caused many to want to say, oh, that's just radical Islam and not Islam at large. The overall picture of Islam, including things such as child brides and black slavery, things you see in Islamic nations on a daily basis, that many leftists and Democrats have downplayed due to their own censorship laws. Now that the hate speech law is out of the way, we can bring the truth out and dispel the ignorance. It is imperative to refute the liberals' lie that these things only happen with radical Islamic groups and that this is not everyday life under Sharia law. Child brides are seen on a daily basis in Islamic nations, just as well as black slaves, 27 million sold a year in Islamic countries. This is daily life under Sharia law. Radical leftists defending Islam have done so out of ignorance. They've barely skimmed the surface of what life under Sharia law is truly like. That for racial minorities, such as the over 27 million black African slaves bought and sold in Islamic nations yearly, akin to the slave trade that went on in the United States, if not more harsh, as the slave trade in Islam, still selling the slaves chained and shackled, sold naked on the block, are also expected to be sex slaves. It's even worse than the slavery that went on in the United States. Why radical leftists step in the defense of Islam is lack of knowledge, and they are the uninformed vote. Let's take a closer look. Radical leftists supported attempts to continue on in the hate speech laws, now overturned by our federal Supreme Court, upholding our legal right to debate the issue during the Fred Phelps hearings. Why the hate speech laws were overturned was narrowed down to a writer in the Netherlands of a major newspaper arrested for hate speech for exposing that Mohammed had married a 6-year-old. And we now know that marrying a child in Islam is acceptable under Sharia law because Mohammed had done so, claiming he did not have penetration until she was 9, which has led to the belief that since Mohammed did other things with the child, that an act called thighing is acceptable. Marrying a child 6 years old, touching and feeling, just no penetration until age 9. This practice of thighing in Islam goes way underreported in the United States. Yet the hate speech laws were overturned. Our legal right to debate the issues, as upheld in the federal Supreme Court, citing our legal right to debate homosexuality, Islam, abortion, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint. Though radical leftist protesters, Democrats, claim to be unaware of child brides being the norm under Sharia law and in Islamic nations, while the radical leftist, liberal Democrat protesters may be totally unaware of the pedophilia, child brides running rampant in nations under Sharia law, Islamic nations. This ad, as you see here, paid for by Hillary for America, is more proof that the Democratic Party was not ignorant to the child bride epidemic. Meanwhile, liberals still apologize for Islam and stay silent on the issue. Speaking out, while there's still the freedom to do so, is wise, as we've seen from the radical leftist protesters that there's vast ignorance in the United States concerning what Islam is and what goes on in Islamic nations, and that it's not just radical Islam that commits these atrocities. Child marriage, slavery of the minority races, 27 million black African slaves sold on the block naked in Islamic nations yearly. Also expected to be sex slaves. When is the last time you've heard the lamestream media speak out about child molestation cases in these child marriages in Islamic nations? After Obama, very little was ever said to expose Islam here in the United States. Why radical leftists feel so much sympathy for Sharia law and Islamic countries' viewpoints as if Americans should not be protesting and should allow more and more ground gained by Islamists here in the United States. When one looks in the faces of the black African slaves, knowing that there's over 25 million a year bought and sold in Islamic nations, not to mention those that aren't up for sale on the block, one cannot help but to see how callous the Democrat media is to sit back and be silent. As I discussed in my last video, Islam started the slave trade. That slave trade that was carried out here in the United States. Islamic nations never quit bringing in slaves, buying and selling slaves, owning slaves, and holding them prisoner for life. When's the last time you've heard the mainstream media confront this issue? Or have they ever? Have they been kept in the dark? Is the mainstream media as ignorant as the American population? All they've heard is Democrat revisionist history in the public schools and the state universities. Where's the in-depth study that we used to see from reporters? Again, when is the last time you've heard the mainstream media speak against slavery and the owning of black African slaves, up to 27 million bought and sold yearly in Islamic nations? And when is the last time you heard the liberal, mainstream, Democrat-ran media speak out concerning child marriages, buying, and Islamic nations allowing pedophilia? One could certainly be rest assured that if those in the Black Lives Matters protest movement had been kept abreast of the over 25 million black African slaves sold yearly in Islamic nations and been informed by our liberal Democrat media, they certainly would not have shown up in support of Sharia law, Islamic law, to try to counter the protesters who were there to bring this truth before the public's eyes and ears. When Obama and the Democrats attempted to silence small media outlets, webcasts, and bloggers, it would have censored out this truth completely from the United States. It isn't that shocking to note that Obama, the same president behind attempts at net neutrality, making the internet considered a utility and therefore able to be censored, being the same individual who brought us the Obama-Pelosi hate speech law, now overturned in the federal Supreme Court due to unconstitutionality, to censor anyone speaking against the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. Remembering that it was Muhammad that married the 6-year-old child, admitted to fondling the child, and no penetration until age 9, now a common practice in Islam because Muhammad had done this. Child brides are a regular, everyday event in Islamic countries due to this fact. Referred to as thawing, as I've mentioned earlier. Obama states the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. And this is who was behind attempts at net neutrality or censorship. Had they won their censorship, the truth of child marriages and pedophilia in Islam would have been silenced, and all protests against such acts also silenced. America's biggest issue in media is not fake news. poorly thought out and non-researched news stories coming from newscasters who have been fed Democrat revisionist history in the public schools and have not read in depth on the issues. And of course, biased. Why would leftist Democrats not want to report black slavery in nations that are under Sharia law, Islamic nations? And why would the Democrat-ran media find it acceptable to overlook stories concerning child marriages where 6-year-olds are being groped and forced to have sex at age 9? Again, in nations under Sharia law, Islamic nations. As if the lives of these children are not supposed to matter to the average American. Do we have civil rights when we see our fellow man held captive, whether as a slave or forced into a situation as a child bride? Americans need to speak up for small media outlets and press for more truth in the public schools. That's what the media will not disclose. The Fairness in Media Act we remember from the 1990s. That was brought on by the Democrats in hopes to censor Rush Limbaugh off major networks. Needs have been enforced straight across the board, where exactly the opposite should take place, where conservatives should be allowed equal time and not have their views dumbed down, where the truth of what needs to be said is left out. The conservative voice in the United States has been stifled and the truth silenced. Your legislators to have them press the FCC to enforce the Fairness in Media Act, and this time that it be in support of the conservative voice getting equal time on the major networks. This has been another End Times Prophecy News Update. Carrie Geren Scoggins. Thank you for listening.